every family almost has a version of a lot of these fairy tales. Now, Walt Disney has fairy tales versions, sometimes cleaned up quite a bit, or sometimes changed quite a bit from the originals. But in a way, fairy tales lend themselves to that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Fairy tales, okay, how does every fairy tale start?
Once upon a time.
Right, once upon a time. Once upon a time. Now, again, that's not specific. That's not saying this really happened to me, 3 weeks ago. There was it's not history. It's not, 200 years ago, there was this knight. It's timeless. That very formula sort of lifts it above the history, so that we know it's fiction, that the child knows it's fiction, but also so that because it's universal in a lot of ways, as we'll see. Fairy tales are very conventional in that they have certain patterns that you see repeated over and over and over and over again. The wicked stepmother, the ugly duckling, the princess, all of these different plot elements you see appearing over and over again in variations in different fairy tales. Of course, the conventions of how every fairy tale starts once upon a time. How does every fairy tale end? They all lived happily ever after. And that's probably the most important part of a fairy tale, the happy ending. The happy ending. They all lived happily ever after, which enables fairy tales to really deal with some serious, maybe scary things and dilemmas that children are put into that are just horrible. But because we know, and the child knows, at the end, they all lived happily ever after. That sort of frees the story to deal with very serious things because we know it's going to turn out all right. How it's going to turn out all right, we may not see, or the child may not see, but we know it's always going to end. They all lived happily ever after. Now, where else do you see that ending? Not in fiction, but in truth. Yeah. The Bible, the gospel, the Christian life. And we too may go through terrible trials and tribulations. But the Christian knows that we're going to live happily ever after at the end of the story. So we always have to wait. The meaning is not clear until the end. And that's the way with our lives in many ways. We're going to have a happily ever after, and we'll be able to look back, and even the bad things in our lives, the struggles, are going to have a meaning that we did not realize at the time. Just like a fairy tale is. And because of that, I think fairy tales fit interestingly with a Christian worldview in a way that other forms maybe don't, even though, again, they get into some bizarre things, as we'll see. Okay, but I want to start with a very simple fairy tale, then we're going to get to one that's more complicated, and then we're going to get into one that's really, really dark and scary, and yet they live happily ever after. Let's consider maybe one of the earliest fairy tales you tell children. Three Bears. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. That'd be easy enough for us to understand and to get into without too many difficulties. The other thing about fairy tales, they have stood the test of time, and that every generation loves these stories. A lot of them appear in different cultures. It's been said that just about every culture has a Cinderella story. And again, scholars can't really explain that. But I think these deal with some very primal, universal things, and the way it gets into the way children think, the way parents think and need to teach their children certain things, but also things that are just fun or funny to all kids, and certainly Three Bears would be that way. Do we need to tell you the story of the Three Bears, or we start that? Goldilocks, well, starts off Daddy Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. They all have their 3 bowls of porridge. They all have their 3 special chairs that just belong to them. They have their 3 beds. And then this little girl breaks in, eats the porridge, breaks the chairs, totally messes up everything else. And you can do a lot with this, with the voices, Daddy Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. And so, you can make that when you're telling it to a child. You can really ham it up. Now, let's look at, remember, one of the things I said, when you look at a text and trying to figure out the meaning, watch for things that are repeated in the story. Watch for the effect of the story. And then you can come to grips maybe with the bigger theme of the story. Okay, let's start with that one. Is there anyone that's pretty obvious? Is there a lesson to the story of the 3 Goldilocks and the 3 Bears? Oh, don't break and enter. Yes, right. Otherwise, Goldilocks may turn into a cat burglar and find a bad end in prison. Don't go into other people's houses. Okay, that's pretty basic. That's pretty simple. Sometimes you can draw that out for a child. There's something else going on here. How is the 3 bears? What is that family like? What is it about? Okay, the 3 bowls of porridge, the 3 chairs, the 3 beds. Everything in the same order, everything in the same way. What's that a picture of? That then Goldilocks comes in and messes it all up. Okay, order. Notice the descriptions of the family. Yes, it's certainly about family, and this is where it gets us into the heart of it. The family represents an order. Everybody has their place in the family. Everybody has their own stuff. It's in relation to each other. It's very orderly. But then the little girl comes and turns the order all upside down until she's caught out and discovered, and nothing bad happens to her. She runs away and order is restored, and they all live happily ever after, including, I guess, Goldilocks, who has learned her lesson, blah, blah, blah. Right, exactly. So, think about this. Order in the family versus what Goldilocks represents. Okay, when you're raising children, I know you're trying to teach them, the catechism and all the big lessons of life. What's the most basic thing involved in child raising? What do you want to teach your little child about?
Can I get a book about family vocations?
Okay, right. Well, these have a vocational dimension. I think there's a vocational theme here. One of the things you try to do is to get your children to not live in chaos, but to develop a good, positive order, right? We all heard some talks about, the passions have to be ordered. Things have to be under control. You don't just eat everything you want when you're a child. You teach them to be polite. You teach manners. You don't just tear up everything that you see. You learn to control yourself. You teach them to try to teach them to clean up after themselves, to not make a mess, right? To not take things that belong to the brother or the sister, who need to learn how to share and not just hold it to themselves. Anyway, a big part of it is teaching this benevolent order that any civilized person has to sometimes internalize. Now here you have this very orderly family of bears, and then Goldilocks shows up. Now she represents another kind of childhood, kind of like what kids normally are. Eating, taking, doing whatever she wants, breaking stuff, making a mess. So you've got those, another aspect is, what is the conflict in this story? This isn't a conflict of good guys and bad guys, or villains and heroes, and with violence and all that. There's a conflict between the family of bears and this little girl. And notice they both act in different ways. So here's the other thing we're talking about. What is the effect? In other words, in the story, which side do children tend to identify with? The bears. It could have been written, and probably a modern writer maybe does with, on Goldilocks' side, but they tend to identify with the bears. And it's told from the point of view of the bears, and they come back and see everything is messed up, and the baby bear, my chair's broken, and he cries, and then the baby bear sees Goldilocks in his bed, and it's really told through the baby bear's point of view mostly. Yeah. But notice how that happened. In the story, the child who hears this identifies with the orderly side, even though maybe actually they're probably more like Goldilocks for a while, until they're about 18 or so. But notice how this simple little story, it means something. Okay, there's a truth there. Not a truth that children are really like this, or a truth that bears can talk. No, any child knows that bears can't talk and don't dress up like the three bears do. But it's dealing with real truths, right? Real moral truths or ideals that are very helpful. I mean, they're not big, deep things, but learning how to function in a family, learning how to grow up. You see that in Three Bears. Now, there are other things there too. How many bowls of porridge are there? 3. How many chairs are there? How many beds are there? Again, anytime you see a repetition in a story, that's something to kind of look at. And the one bed is too hard, the other bed is too soft, the other bed is just right. She falls fast asleep. In later versions that I know, even told my family, we missed some of it. I was looking at the oldest recorded version of this story, and it says the porridge, one bowl was too salty, the other bowl was too sweet, the third bowl was just right. So Goldilocks ate it all up. And then the chairs, again, I didn't have this in my family, this is the older version. The daddy's bear's chair was too high, the mama bear's bed was too low, but the baby bear's chair was just right, so she sat in it and broke it all to bits. But this idea of 3, one is wrong in one direction, the other is wrong in the opposite direction, but you find that median, it's just right. Okay, and that's the one to take. And you see that with the porridge, you see that with the chair, you see that in the bed. What is that? What are these three alternatives? Does that have any significance?
Golden mean.
The golden mean. It's very classical. Aristotle says that that extremes will lead you into trouble. The right path is the mean. In other words, if you're too scared, that's wrong. But if you're too foolhardy and aren't scared of anything, that'll get you into trouble. Courage is maybe being scared, but you do the right thing anyway. You don't let it stop you. Eating too much, as I have just done a few minutes ago, that's not good. Eating too little, that's also not good. That makes you anorexic and it gives you other health problems, opposite health problems. But to eat just the right amount, that's the challenge. And so in this story about bears and porridge and Goldilocks, it's anticipating, or it's dealing with this very sophisticated philosophical concept, but it's doing it in a concrete way that's fun and enjoyable, and part of the order that Goldilocks eventually has to learn. And the message is there, even as she's going through the porridge and the chairs and the bed. You've got to be ordered in your appetites. You've got to be ordered in the things that you do. Anyway, three bears. Yes.
The idea of three is pleasing to us,
Yes.
but also three for a family.
Yes.
And then Goldilocks is the single, is the family that had the order, and the single came in and tried to destroy the family. I think that's probably reason children gravitate towards that, because it's a mama bear, a daddy bear, and a baby bear, and they feel that.
Yeah. What happens in a family when you have a daddy and a mama, and you're the baby, and another baby comes? A little Goldilocks kind of baby. Yeah, you have that adjustment, and I'm sure the perception is, this little kid, eats my food and breaks my stuff, and I've wondered if part of the resonance is the sense of that family order being broken by a newcomer. She's not even a bear. But eventually, Goldilocks. I wonder if that's how little children kind of think. Hey, this kid's not one of us. But eventually, and they find Goldilocks, and Goldilocks is scared and learns her lesson. In some cleaned up versions, she's sorry, and she comes back. They become friends, and anyway, you can just see how in tune this is to universal human psychological realities, and even maybe the strange ways that little kids actually think sometimes.
Just a quick observation, I was thinking about the politically incorrect version of these, and I think the satire and the irony actually enhance the truths that you can glean from the stories.
Yeah.
Amplify it a little bit.
Well, maybe, yeah, but it is, fairy tales are kind of politically incorrect because they put forward traditional roles of family and of women and of men and so on. But I think some of that is based on such a superficial appropriation of these stories. I don't even really know how to read well. Yes?
Well, I just was thinking about the three different obstacles also.
Yeah, there are obstacles.
And you could, as you're talking about rising action, could you kind of teach using the three, and then Because that's
Oh,
really
yeah.
common in plays and things too. You have three
Oh,
different,
yeah.
or comedy, you want to have three jokes, and then
Good.
always the kicker.
It's a great point. Yeah, for teaching not just the story, but teaching literature in general. These conventions, many are universal in other literature, including very, sophisticated works. Yeah, the pattern of the three, the law of three, in rhetoric, the tricolon, to have 3 points. And in the rising action, the falling action, in a story, in fact, it's been said that all stories, all plots are variations of either the Three Bears or Little Red Riding Hood. They all are. Goldilocks is an intruder plot. The author will set up an orderly community, and all of a sudden a stranger comes into town. Okay, how often have you seen that? Whether it's a cowboy movie or a romance where a person's life is all very ordered and nice, and then someone new moves into town, and all of a sudden everything's different. The other one, I'm not going to talk about the Red Riding Hood, we could, where you start in an orderly community and then leave it. Go out into the darkness. Go out into the dangerous woods where you don't know what's going to happen, and there are dangers there. I mean, Lord of the Rings, Hobbiton, wonderful, ordered little community going out into Mordor and all the adventures that happen to the Hobbit. Think about that and see how far you can take that. Let's look at another one. Beauty and the Beast. This is one big. Again, the Disney version was out not long ago. Somewhat different from the earlier one. But now this is about, in the original, there's a merchant man who goes out and his ship sinks and he's lost everything, but he's rescued by this strange being, this beast in this magical palace. And his daughter, he had asked her, what do you want me to bring you after my long journey? Just bring me a rose. And so he sees this rose in the garden and picks the rose to take back to his daughter. And the beast says, "You stole my rose. You must die for that." And anyway, it builds up in different versions. And basically, he says, you will die. And he said, "I'm just going to bring it to my daughter. She just wanted to run." So, all right, I will spare you if your daughter comes to take your place. And somehow she finds out, and she does come, trying to save her father. And she's in this amazing palace, but living with this beast, this hideous looking, scary, big, monstrous creature. What happens though in the course of the story? What happened to her feelings for the beast?
She became fond of him.
Yes, she becomes fond of him. She gets to know him and to see why he's tormented, and various things happen, and in different versions, different things happen. But at one point, the beast saves her life from some wolves, but he's terribly wounded, and she's trying to nurse him back to health. And she says, I love you. And in the original, a tear comes down, but when the tear hits the beast, all of a sudden he turns into a handsome prince. And they get married and they all live happily ever after. Okay. Now, again, what is that about? What is that saying about love, for example?
Based on action. It's not based on appearances only.
Okay.
He gave himself for her.
Yeah, that's a couple things. It warns us not to just judge by appearances. Okay, now in a lot of popular stories, even in fairy tales, the good guys are handsome and beautiful and the villains are evil and hideous looking. But there's a lesson. You mustn't judge just by appearances. Don't judge a person just by the way they look. Yes, she is beauty, she is beautiful, and she is a kind, good person in the story. But to learn that the beast, and again, it introduces us, our first reaction is, oh, how terrible. That he turns out to be a good person with a good character. And eventually, when she sees that and comes to love him for who he is, not just be scared because of what he looks like, he turns into the handsome prince, which again is the transforming power of love, and how if you love somebody, you see them, you see their beauty, they're attracted to you. It's not a man, or they're attracted to you, but again, it's not just a matter of the superficial appearances. Okay, now that's kind of profound in this story. Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, has a great essay on about fairy tales, and he says the message of Beauty and the Beast is that someone becomes lovable only after they've been loved. Okay. The love comes first, and then that makes a transformation, and then they're lovable. And so this is a pretty important message for young people to learn as they're growing up. Now, one thing you can look at for meaning, as we talked about last time, is to look at the cultural context or the historical context. Okay, this story goes back hundreds and hundreds of years in a time of mostly arranged marriages. Okay, now let's see if we can think of this, nice Disney story back in, the 1400s, where families arrange marriages for their daughter with someone maybe they've never seen before, that neither of the children have never seen before. And very often, I'm sure daughters are in a situation, their father, the family maybe needs money. They failed as merchants. They need money. A good marriage can help restore a family's fortune. And I'm sure there were many young teenage girls, or adolescent girls even, who were in that position. For the sake of their family, they're going to marry somebody that they've never seen before. And then when they do see the person, he might not be the fairy tale prince. Maybe the person is old or ugly or scary. In any event, I'm sure it was a scary situation no matter what the new husband looked like. But in time, apparently, and historians of the family bear this out, in time, these arranged marriages often became very loving partnerships. You know, they didn't know each other at first when they got married, but eventually, you know, when they really knew each other, then the love came. Marriage wasn't based on love. It was maybe based on need or money or family connections or who knows what. And yet, it's possible to love someone and for that marriage to turn into something very, very beautiful. Yeah. But again, I'm sure that some of the young girls hearing this story back in the original times, you know, it might have helped them in dealing with their cultural situation. Anything else about Beauty and the Beast? I haven't seen the latest one. I saw the Disney cartoon. I haven't seen the live action one yet. Yeah.
We should see there, it makes me think whether it was like eight or because it makes us monstrous inside of the
Yeah.
world of beasts.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, she isn't Jesus, but there's an echo.
Yeah, the love of God.
Loving the unlovable.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's what we are unlovable, but God loves us and transforms us into his bride. Yeah, that's a great application. And that was part of G.K. Chesterton's point. He was talking about the real Christian common sense that he saw in fairy tales. And it is an image of grace and how love actually works, whether it's love between man and a woman or the love with God. It's not based on merit or how we look. It's different, but it's transforming. How many of you saw the Disney version? Yeah. I looked for a synopsis just to see how it was similar or different. It looked to me like at the end, they didn't get married. Is that right? It ended with them dancing happily in the ballroom. But it stopped short of marriage, which is kind of the point. Certainly the traditional story, they do get married. But again, losing that sense of what marriage is, and we have the sense in our culture, and it's encouraged by a lot of the young adult novels and other things, that marriage is this personal fulfillment, and it's not the kind of hard-earned kind of love that you see in this fairy tale. But anyway, other thoughts on Beauty and the Beast? Yes, Bess.
Well, I was just, when he made that comment about making it, or, applying it to the Christian sort of, I just wondered what your thoughts were about the beast being kind of condemned because he was so ugly inside. And then
that's right.
he becomes redeemed when he realizes that
Yes.
he was being bestial.
Okay, that's the other side of the story. You're absolutely right. Why did he become a beast? Because he transgressed. What he did varies in the stories, but he was cruel in some way. He was bad, and so he turned into a beast, and he had to learn to love also. And everyone was rejecting. No one loved him. But he had to learn to love and to be loved. Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, Pastor Ness.
We did add the older Disney movie to our library here just this spring.
Oh, yay, good.
After I read that G.K. Chesterton had endorsed it as I think one of you would know. I think didn't he pick it as one of his 5 best stories that really should be told, or something like that.
Okay, probably so.
But yeah, it really does. I thought, though, from a pastoral standpoint, there's a real danger to it, because I think it almost does promote a bit perhaps of a human conceit that is not unfamiliar to most of us, of seeing a young lady marry a pretty bestial guy, in a sense, very confident that she is going to have that transformative power and change him later, and it doesn't work out.
Yeah. And of course, in the original story, he actually asked her to marry him several times before, and she always says no. It's after his transformation that she wants to marry him. Yeah, so that's true.
Well, in the new Disney, they are showing a more multicultural view, and I think the underlying thing is for all races to get along.
And apparently there's a gay character.
Get along with everybody, be happy.
Yeah. And again, the result, you compare that story to the original story, and you see the original story has so much more to it, and it's not nearly so superficial. Okay, now let's go to a really scary one. Oh, yes.
I'm more familiar actually with the Disney version of this story. And she added, and I don't know if it's in the original, I don't think I've ever read the original version. But one of the characteristics of the Beast is that he read it. He had this huge library.
That's right, his library. Yeah.
That's one of the things that attracted beauty to him.
Yes.
Was the learning.
Yeah, and she learns this bigger world that she had. Yeah.
He retreated to his library when he was rejected by everybody else.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, that's right.
part of that process of transformation.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I think that's in the Disney version too, isn't it? The best, if you want to see a movie version of Beauty and the Beast, read or watch the black and white French version by, what's his name? He was a great film director. No. Who? Renoir? Maybe so. Maybe that. He's a surrealist, and the imagery is so kind of very strange, and it's just. But the transformation scene is just so moving in the way he puts it together. Okay, well, let's look at one that even Disney has not dared to approach, because there's no way you could turn this into a nice little happy, sappy, multicultural story. Hansel and Gretel. Now this...
Dr. Veith, it's actually Jean Cocteau.
Cocteau. Jean Cocteau. Thank you, yes. Cocteau. Hansel and Gretel. Now this, a lot of fairy tales are very scary. And certainly this one is. In fact, it's been said it may start with the deepest fear of a young child. Hansel and Gretel are in their bed and they're listening to their parents talk. Now, in some versions, they're just overhearing the father and mother say, "We're out of food." Again, they're poor peasants. We only have food for a few more days. I don't know what we're going to do. In the original version, there's a wicked stepmother and the father, and the stepmother says, "We don't have enough food. We've got to get rid of these kids. They eat too much. They're a drain on us. You've got to take them out in the woods and leave them." I said, no, I don't want to do that. And you have the motif of the wicked stepmother. It's a stepmother, a real mother wouldn't do these things. It's sort of that's a mother figure. And the father is very weak. Now the father is supposed to protect the children, and the mother is supposed to nourish the children. A lot of these fairy tales start with a situation, Cinderella is one of them, where the parents are not fulfilling their calling as parents. Now, I actually remember when I was little, I don't know, I was 5 or 6, hearing my parents out in the kitchen, outside of my bedroom, worried about money. As families always do. Oh, how are we going to pay this bill? If we can just make it to payday, we'll be okay. And I remember really, it was scary. I mean, the other thing is, what if my parents can't provide for me? I mean, that's the worst. Anyway, in the story, Hansel and Gretel, in one version, the father reluctantly takes them out in the woods to leave them. But Hansel has little pebbles that he drops every few steps. So he leaves them, and then the next day they show up because he followed the pebbles. And they go again, and then the wicked stepmother, oh, I gotta get rid of. So the next time he can't find pebbles, so he has a little bit of dried bread, and he drops breadcrumbs. And they're left in the forest. But this time the birds eat the breadcrumbs, and they're lost. These two, little boy and his little sister, lost in these woods. Parents rejected them. Nothing to eat at home. Again, that's bad. That's horrible. Notice how in this story, one of the motifs is about eating. Okay, first there's not enough to eat. Then the birds eat the breadcrumbs. And they're going along, and they see a gingerbread house. Oh, lots to eat. Their problems are solved, right? Well, so they start eating the house, and this voice, who's eating on my house? And it's a wicked witch. And she, so see, I mean, they're hungry, so they're eating all this candy and cake and gorging themselves, and then the witch catches them, and she wants to eat them. Again, the eating motif. And so she gives Hansel lots to eat to fatten him up, right? So he's a smart little boy, though. He puts out his the chicken bone like we just had, and because the witch can't see very well. Oh, he's still too skinny to eat. And so he gets eaten even more. But finally, the witch gets impatient, and of course she makes Gretel do all the work. She'll eat her later, and to build up the fire, tell me if it's hot enough, and she pretends like she doesn't know what she's saying, and I have to show you everything. And she said, I want you to open the oven like this and look in and see if it's hot. Whereupon Gretel immediately pushes her in, and she burns up, and she releases Hansel, and they find the witch's treasure, and they go home, and the wicked stepmother has died, and they have all this money to give to their father, and they're not going to be poor anymore, and now they have everything they need, and they all live happily ever after. Okay. No, again, lots of disturbing things. Yes. What does that show a child, though? Okay, the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. But what happens to them? Are they defeated? Are they destroyed? Yeah, no, they win. They're victorious. They use their wits, and they outwit this threat to them, and they win. One writer about fairy tales says, yes, a lot of them are really, scary, and maybe you need to be age appropriate here, but children love them because a lot of times it shows a child that even if some of the worst things could happen, you can be victorious over them. Bruno Bettelheim wrote maybe one of the best books on fairy tales called The Uses of Enchantment. And he was a child psychologist who used these in counseling children who had been through the Holocaust, the concentration camp, who were just total wreck. And he used fairy tales to help them to come back into life in a positive way, to build up their confidence, to build up their sense that life is worth it anyway, that they're going to be okay. And so even the scary parts of this, just psychologically, because children really do worry about things like that. Or my parents really love me, and they blame themselves. I mean, in the version that says, where the parents don't want to harm them, but our family's starving. Oh, Hansel and Gretel, we better leave. It's our fault. It's our fault. Family will do better if we're not here. The children blame themselves. Their parents get a divorce, or even when their parents have a fight, sometimes kids blame themselves. And so a story like this, and there's some other similar ones, shows that. But it's also, in order to win, they have to control their appetites. Again, that same theme. Yes, your problem is you're hungry. But having everything you want to eat and all the good stuff like gingerbread and candy canes and all the rest, be careful, because that can lure you into bad things. I mean, you have your appetites. Your appetites can get you into big trouble, as we well know. And of course, this is raising those kinds of issues. Any thoughts about Hansel and Gretel? Yes.
It's a story of forgiveness, because the kids go home and they forgive Dad.
That's right.
So it's a good story.
Oh, that's so true. That's so true. It was the dad that led them out to their deaths as far as he was concerned. And you do have that barbaric practice, goes back, of exposing the children. The Greeks did it. Yes, they're very civilized and sophisticated philosophically, but if they had an unwanted child, they just take it out in the woods and leave it. And other groups did that too. But they forgave their dad, and they brought riches and treasure. And now we won't be poor anymore. And again, it's a poignant fantasy. You can imagine the peasant child. And almost all of these grew up out of peasant cultures. How this fantasy would be so strong. But yeah, you see that forgiveness. And not forgiveness for the witch. There's also judgment in fairy tales. The witch, yes, she is judged. And typically the bad, evil figures suffer and are punished for what they've done. Chesterton commented like this. He said, a lot of adults don't like that part of fairy tales where, Cinderella's sisters, the birds peck out their eyes and all that stuff. He said, kids love that. He said, because, adults are sinful and we want forgiveness. Children are innocent and they want justice. Children aren't really innocent, as we well know, having, those of us who've had them know well. But, you have that law. Yeah, there's probably themes of law and gospel in different ways, but certainly, and Bettelheim says that extreme justice, where the witch gets burned up in the oven, children need that for closure. They need justice. When there's something so bad, there's got to be punished so badly so that it brings order back into their universe. And so it is true, children need to learn how to forgive. They're very oriented to justice, very law-oriented. That's something else we have to teach them. Okay, we're out of time. The next time we're going to look, now that we've mastered the interpretation of these simple stories, I'm going to give you one that's a great literary creation, and we'll see what we can do with that. All right, I'll see you then.